It always seems like life has plans of its own for us, and what we want or what we hope for aren't always what we end up with. How does that expression go? Man plans, God laughs. I guess my life is kind of like that. I thought I had everything planned out, but now I'm heading down life's road in a completely different direction. My name is Lucas Blue. I live in one of those up and coming small towns that you hear about so often now in the newspapers and on the net. My town, Lewiston, Michigan, has been growing by leaps and bounds. It's small enough that almost everyone here knows someone who knows everybody else, but big enough that no one knows everybody by name. The great thing about these medium-sized up and coming cities is that they combine the small-town friendliness, charm, and lack of things like crime with the amenities and connectedness of the big cities. I already know what you're thinking. That sounds good, but I don't know shit about farming. Well, neither do I. This isn't the 20th century anymore. Remember how back in the Old West Sam Colt made all men, or most men, equal? Well, the internet has done the same thing in our time. I went to college at the University of Michigan, go Blue, and decided a long time ago that living in a larger city like Detroit or Chicago just wasn't for me. I wanted to settle down in a place where I could meet the girl of my dreams, and we could raise our children in the kind of environment that turns them into good, solid citizens. Once again, that was the plan. Now I find myself devoid and bereft of any of the values I eschewed. I am a cold-blooded murderer, and I'm sitting here waiting for a police officer who's already on the way over here to arrest me. The only thing I can say in my defense is that some morons just have it coming. Remember the girl of my dreams? Right now I can't stand the witch. Our divorce is already winding its way through the court system. There are a few complications that will leave me tied to her for the next couple of months or so, but no longer. Since I'll probably be spending most of that time in jail, it really doesn't matter. How did I go so wrong in my life, you're probably wondering, right? Well, let me tell you about it. It all started a few months ago at our town's 4th of July celebration. My wife, Angela, and I hardly ever get to hang out in town much. We met in college. I was there working on a degree in manufacturing and she was in finance. We were the typical fringe students. Both of us were just attractive enough to do well with the opposite sex, but not attractive enough to go into modeling or anything. Both of us were also very into our careers, but not good enough to set the world on fire. What I thought that we were both good at, though, was each other. We had literally everything in common. We liked the same foods, the same TV shows, and we had similar goals in life. Neither of us wanted to be rich or to waste our lives aimlessly pursuing wealth or fame. We both just wanted to be comfortable. We also both believed that family and relationships took precedence over careers. We graduated and settled down here in Lewiston and started building a life. We bought a small farm and quickly leased out the fields to a local farming co-op. We only bought the farm for the buildings. I got a small business loan and renovated the barn. I also bought a couple of Haas CNC machines. I wasn't a manufacturing genius, but then I didn't have to be. I do small orders of very simple parts and market them through an eBay store. I specialize in knockoff parts. So, if a company is copying someone else's idea and needs a quick source for a certain type of bushing or plate, they send me the print or an M&G code program and I run their parts. I ship them out through UPS and it's on to the next order. My business is booming. I also market other parts through eBay as well. Almost any simple item that can be made on a lathe or a mill is up for grabs. I have several different internet stores that sell items as diverse as hot rodding parts for cars to Chinese throwing stars. I make them all in my converted barn. The coolest thing about my business is that I can set my own hours and I rarely have anyone breathing down my neck. I also make a more than decent living. Angela works at the local bank as an assistant manager. I pity her. She has to be up every day at a certain time, and she does everything there that is too difficult for the tellers or that the manager doesn't feel like doing. She has to take all of the flack and gets none of the credit. I guess some of the time she likes her job and others she just hates it. Lately, we'd been in one of those times when she loved it. She was going in early and staying late. She told me that the manager had been on vacation and they were training some new people. I didn't understand what was so great about it until she explained to me that it gave her a chance to train them the way she wanted to. And it gave the bank's parent company a chance to look at the kind of manager she'd make. So, if Sam ever retired or there was a new branch set up in our town or a nearby town, she'd be on their list. I reminded her that in a few years she'd be retiring for the next phase of her career. She laughed and told me that she was looking forward to getting her PhD in SOM. SOM stands for Stay-at-Home Mom. So anyway, we were at the 4th of July celebration hanging out in town and having fun. I decided to enter the declaration drag. It was one of those small town events that had two purposes. The first one was to have fun and blow off some steam. The second one was to cut down on the mischief in town. The next town over had one of those 5K foot races. We had the Double D. The declaration drag was basically a run what you brung drag race. Everyone in town who wanted to show off what their car could do lined up and raced 2 blocks through the heart of the city. Last year, Tyler Stevens won it in his Dodge Challenger. Charlie Green had bought one of those LS Camaros last fall and thought he had a good chance of winning this year. I hated to break his heart, but it wasn't going to happen. The police department, all 4 of them, were usually at the race. It was smart business. They handled the registration of all of the cars. That way, for the rest of the year, if anyone was seen speeding or driving recklessly, all a witness had to do was to either describe or take a picture of the car, and the police immediately knew whose car it was and where to send the ticket. Usually only 32 cars could enter the race. If there were more, they turned it into a 2-day event. If there were less than 32, then drivers who placed higher the year before could be allowed to bypass certain rounds. This was my first year, so I had to do all of the rounds. I was sitting there near the starting line in my almost new Mustang Boss 302. I looked over in the crowd to find Angela and noticed that she was talking to some guy I'd never seen before. She was also smiling at him, and they were very close together. For some reason, seeing it made the hair on my neck stand up. Since it wasn't my turn to race, I was going to go over to them and find out who he was, but I never got the chance. Someone tapped on my window. I turned away from watching Angie, and my frown faded. There was a woman looking into my car. I rolled down the window and took a better look at her. She was tiny but well-proportioned. I shook my head several times to clear my eyes and looked at her again. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet even, and that would be early in the morning on a good day. She had those crystal-clear pale gray eyes that seem otherworldly. She had inky black hair that was cut short. It was one of those haircuts that always seemed to be falling in her face. One side was cut longer than the other. The shorter side she tucked or pinned behind one ear, but the longer side was forever falling in her face, so she was constantly brushing it out of her eyes. She was wearing a light blue denim shirt that was having a hard time containing a truly impressive pair of jugs. She was holding onto a clipboard and looking in through the window at me. "What's your name?" she asked me very slowly. "It won't do you any good," I said, wondering why the hell I'd never seen her around town. I mean, the town just isn't big enough for her to have gone unnoticed. "Why won't it?" she asked sassily. "Because I'm married," I said sadly. "And I'd never cheat on my wife, no matter how gorgeous you are." She got the funniest smile on her face then and pointed straight down at her belt. At first I thought she was trying to get me to notice her bum until I saw the big gold sheriff's badge on the belt. "Let's try this again," she said. "What if I tell you my name first? It's Officer. As in, I work for the police department. That's why they call me Officer Tanya Bradley. I'm the fuzz. Some of you guys call us bacon or pigs. Do you understand the situation now, or do we need more clarification?" I heard her mutter under her breath, "The cute ones are always so stupid." I smiled at her again. "Nope, no further clarification is necessary. You had me at officer. It was my mistake, and one I'll never make again. What can I do for you, officer?" "You can tell me your name and tell me about your car," she said, smiling. I didn't return the smile. "My name is Lucas Aaron Blue, ma'am," I said. "My car is a 2012 Ford Mustang 302 Boss." "How much horsepower?" she asked. "Before or after the modifications, ma'am?" I asked. "What's it running now?" she asked. "Roughly 650 horsepower, ma'am," I said. "But I don't have any speeding tickets here in town, ma'am." "Why are you telling me that?" she asked. As she looked at me, she smiled again and all of that hair fell in front of her face. "You know," she said, "you can pull that stick out of your bum. We got off on the wrong foot, but there's no need to be so formal. Can we start over again? Maybe this is my fault. I'm not here to try to arrest you or anything like that. The police department handles the race registration. I'm going up and down the line of cars getting information on the cars, okay?" I nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am," I guess I'm not gorgeous anymore, since I'm a cop, right? She asked. Just the facts, ma'am, I said. She smiled at me again. She bit her lip and looked at me. So much passed between us in that look, and I think we both realized it. Then the moment was lost as we both came to our senses and realized that this could never go anywhere. As she turned to walk away, she paused and looked over her shoulder at me. Flipping her hair out of those astounding eyes one more time, she threw a haughty, "Good luck," at me and headed for the next car in line. Watching her walk away from me, I had an epiphany. Man has been on this planet for either millions of years slowly evolving, if you favor the scientific approach, or for a little over 2,000 years if you believe in biblical accounts. It has taken all of that time to get women right. It used to be that women came in 3 flavors: fat, skinny, and in between. Back in the 80s, we discovered variations on each theme. There were pears, pegs, and apples evolved to fill out the varieties. We also gave rise to the BBW, the SSBBW, the MILF, and the GILF. But lately, everywhere I turn, I'm simply astounded by the differing shapes of women. Officer Tanya Bradley was incredible. At barely 5 feet tall, she simply defied description. She had a medium frame, meaning she wasn't fat, but she also wasn't skinny. Under normal expectations, she'd have decent to smallish jugs and nice legs. But she didn't have any of those things. Her jugs strained the shirt she was wearing and her bum fit those jeans like she had a half of a basketball filled with jello at the top of each leg. Her waist was wasp-like and roared outwards as it descended. She had the most hourglass-like torso I've ever seen. The legs that supported the whole thing were just as incredible. Her jeans were rolled up to the top of her calf, and she had the shapeliest calves I've ever seen. I could only imagine what her thighs looked like. Even her face was unusual. She didn't have classically beautiful features. Her eyes were probably too pale a shade of gray to be considered beautiful. From the right angle, they were so exotic she looked like a vampire or something. But they fit her. Her nose was too wide, and her lips were a bit too plump. And please don't get me started on that hair. She had to adjust it every 15 seconds at least. Tanya Bradley is hands down the sexiest woman I've ever seen, which is probably why I sat there in my car and forgot that I'd seen my wife smiling at another man while I watched Officer Bradley go from car to car until my race started. I knew that I'd probably have to race 5 times. At least I would if I didn't lose. My first round opponent was some guy who wore a mullet. He drove what looked like a late 70s Monte Carlo. It was a beautiful car, but it didn't belong in a race. Neither did he. He was so busy staring at the cheerleader who waved the flag to start the race that I was gone before he even put his foot on the gas. My next round was against a nerd type in one of those little Japanese imports. He'd obviously seen all of the Fast and the Furious movies twice. I could tell by his paint job. I think he had a 2-stage nitrous system in the car. Unfortunately, by the time he got to his second stage and started really moving, the race was over. He must have been going 200 miles an hour when he crossed the line. But it didn't matter because I got there first. Angela was waving at me by that time. She came over to try to talk to me, but I just shook my head at her. The more I thought about her smiling at that guy, the more pissed I got. I could have spent time smiling and talking to that cute cop, but the first thing I told her was that I was married. Not that she was interested in me anyway, but I told her. That was all Angie had to do too. She just needed to tell me. If she was tired of being married to me, we could take care of that pretty easily. Anyway, there was no use letting her get into my head until the races were over, so I just stayed in the car. But I fully intended to have a talk with her when I was done. Now let's hear the story from Jerry's prospect. My life just never got any better. Where was I? Was I in Vegas? Hell no. Was I in LA? Again no. Was I even back in the Rotten Apple? Nope. I was stuck in some one-horse backwater that barely had the balls to call itself a city. We'd been here for about 4 weeks now, and I was eager to get the hell out of here. There was nothing to do, unless you were into that whole wholesome family entertainment thing. Today was the first thing I'd seen here that had actually caught my interest, and I had to work. A couple of associates and I were on a tour of small towns. We'd stay in each town for a month or so, making sure we weren't seen with each other. We'd each handle our specialties, and then we'd get together, rob the bank, and get the hell out of Dodge. Arnie, an old friend of mine, had brought me into the group for 2 reasons. One was my looks and ability to schmooze people, especially women. The second was my ability to drive. In a small crew like ours, each member had to be very good at what they did. There was no room for incompetence because there was no overlapping of skills. It wasn't a case where 2 or 3 guys would be doing the same thing. That made it difficult sometimes, but on the other hand, we only had to split the profits 3 ways. My job was to go in and scout the bank. I'd find out as much as possible about the bank, its employees, and their procedures. I also had to scout out the best possible routes out of town and have several cars ready for any possible exit strategy. While doing this, I also had to lay low to make sure that no one would remember ever having seen me. Arnie would gather information about the local police force, like how many of them there were, their backgrounds and the way they responded to things, etc. Darren was our electronics whiz. He'd disable alarm systems and actually block radio frequencies which would prevent the local bacon from being able to coordinate their efforts. I'd been working on the assistant manager at the bank for about 3 weeks. Her name was Angela Blue. Doesn't that sound like she ought to be doing adult movie? Anyway, if you want to know what Angela Blue lately, I can proudly say, me. Angela is your typical small-town housewife. It took me a little while, but not as long as you'd think to get into her panties. The first day, she was giving all of the typical bullshit about how much she loved her husband. But before you knew it, she was flat on her back, slinging her kitty at me like there was no tomorrow. All I had to do was listen to her and tell her what she wanted to hear. It's simply too easy to do, especially to the types that really do love their husbands. There are simply no perfect relationships. Angela started out with, "I love him so much," but by the end of the conversation, she was telling me all the things she wished he'd realize. Like the fact that the guy really loved her, but he was too stuck on this plan they'd made before they even got married. They wanted to wait until they reached a certain age to get pregnant. And Angela hated her job with a passion. She wanted to quit then. The manager was playing around on his wife with a couple of the tellers who didn't know about each other. To calm things down, he was taking some time off until he could get rid of one of them. It didn't matter whether he was there or not. She did all of the work and she was tired of it. There was no way he'd ever retire. So she had risen as far in that bank as she ever would. The town was so small there was only one bank. She was also the only person in the entire bank who'd gone to college, let alone had a degree in finance. It was embarrassing. Her 4-year college education got her $1 an hour more than the tellers who were mostly high school graduates or dropouts. The 2 who were the manager actually got unspecified bonuses in their checks every week, which meant that they earned more than she did. She felt like a babysitter more than anything else. Her husband just didn't realize how much she hated working at the bank. He made a lot more money than she did, and he never had to leave the house. He'd paid back his small business loan in less time than the loan term and was banking more money than they'd ever need. He'd also paid off the farm so that it was free and clear, and was actually making even more money leasing out their field since all he really needed was the barn that he'd turned into some kind of high-tech machine shop. He also had room in that big barn for a small, but well-outfitted gym and a garage for the Mustang he'd bought recently. He still kept his former car, another Mustang, but the boss was his pride and joy. What she really wanted to do was to go to her husband and say, "Look, honey, I'm tired of the bank. I want to quit." But she didn't know how he'd take it. I found all of that out the first afternoon I spent with her. I'd walked into the bank and started giving her the story about being an advance man for a movie company that was interested in shooting a film in her town. I told her I'd probably at some point want to make several large deposits and establish a line of credit. I needed someone in town to help me scout locations and get the lay of the land. In typical small-town friendliness, which really meant that she was so bored she'd probably try peeing on her own shoes just for something different, she volunteered. I started telling her how pretty she was. She's okay looking, but not really pretty. Her husband probably used to tell her all the time that she was pretty, but had stopped because he was sure she knew he thought so by now. Then again, 6 or 7 years ago, she probably was pretty, but had simply withered on the vine. So my flattery went a long way. I backed up the flattery by accidentally bumping into her whenever I could to get her used to me touching her. Then I started just looking at her longingly. After a while, she got the idea and started blushing. I backed that up by innocently mentioning that I thought her husband was a fool. If I was married to her, she'd already be pregnant, and we'd be homeless because I'd never go to work. There was no way we'd ever get out of bed. A few touches here and there that were initially apologized for led to me copping a feel here and there. Those feels became normal and led to that first kiss. From then on, there was no turning back, and now the witch acts like my tool is hers. I know realistically that the only thing I have going for me is the newness of the experience, and in time she'll realize that I don't give a flying sex about her. But by then, all of the bank's money will be gone and me with it. If she's smart, she'll keep her mouth closed, stay married, and spend a few months making it up to her husband, and no one will lose anything. She'll even have a nice fantasy to remember in her old age. I wonder if she'll ever know how much I hate having sex with her. I mean, kitty is kitty, but sex is an art form. It's like any other sport. Some of us do it for the love of the game, and others do it for money. When you love the person you're screwing and they love you, it can be a wonderful experience. There are simply no right or wrong moves you can make because you're doing it to please your partner, and they have the same goal in mind. Your body's reactions are triggered and influenced by the emotions you feel for that person and the happiness you want to share with them. Her husband probably loves the shit out of this witch because she's awful in bed. She's one of those small-town, almost cute witches who think that screwing her is the highest honor that can be bestowed on any man. In other words, she pretty much just lays there and takes it. Occasionally, she whimpers out a tiny little ooh or two. I almost fall asleep screwing her now. The only difference between her and one of those new high-tech blow-up dolls is that she has a pulse. After it's over, she looks at you with that expression on her face like she's just done something so great for you that you owe her your devotion for the rest of your life. I don't think so, Angela. You can actually see space between her breasts and her arms. It's not sexy at all, unless you happen to love her, and of course, I don't. So anyway, here I am trying to blend into the crowd and enjoy myself at something called the Declaration Drag. I just don't get these yokels sometimes. Did they think the founding fathers had drag races down the middle of the street? At any rate, it looked kind of cool. If things were normal and I wasn't working, I'd have probably wanted to steal a car and get in on it. I looked over all of the cars to see if I could predict who'd win each race, and also who I thought might win the whole thing. It was a tough decision because there were so many great cars. Who'd have thunk they had this many cool cars in this town? I saw a Chevelle SS that I'd have killed someone for. A Nissan 350Z that was just beautiful was lined up to race a brand spanking new 2012 Dodge Charger SRT that still had the dealer's sticker in the window. There were great cars all over everywhere. Just as I was really getting into it, I heard a voice beside me. "My husband is probably going to win this," she said. I looked down and went into acting mode, pretending that seeing her had just made my day. I steadied my stomach by reminding myself that in only a few days, I'd be out of here, and I'd never have to look at this witch again. I knew that seeing me, here in the middle of all of these people who knew her but didn't know about our relationship, was turning the witch on. It was the thrill of possible exposure. I looked over to where she was pointing and saw a decent-looking guy sitting in an outrageous Mustang. It had a custom lime green paint job. I'd never seen one of those new Boss 302s in that color. As he revved the engine, I could tell that the car was nowhere near stock. The car was almost shaking from the engine vibrations. Then I noticed the hot little Betty he was talking to. She was my type of girl. That made two things in this town that I actually wanted. The first was some time with that hot little woman, and the second was Banana Tits' husband's Mustang. His performance in the race only served to underscore two things for me. The first was that I wanted that car, and the second was that Banana Tits is married to a sucker. He made short work of his opponents in the first 3 rounds. His third-round victory over a guy in one of those new Chargers was especially sweet, but I almost missed it. Banana Tits, while looking at the race, made a grab for my tool as the race started. As I said, she thinks it's hers. His semifinal was very close, though he was the winner. He raced another Mustang and only eked out the victory over the last few yards. The final was set. Hubby's beast of a Mustang was matched against a bright orange Camaro LS1. I already knew what would happen. From talking to Angela, I knew that her hubby's Stang was putting out somewhere north of 600 horsepower. From doing my homework, I also knew that the Camaro put out closer to 450 and the Mustang weighed over 200 pounds less. Unless hubby had the reflexes of a snail, it shouldn't even be close. At least it would be a good show for the kids, I thought. And I wasn't wrong either. It was a good show for the kids. The two brightly colored latest generation, which meant making them look like they did 30 years ago. Muscle cars rev their engines and flex their technical muscles. A little blonde cheerleader waved a flag and jumped up into the air as both cars let out a roar that sounded like an enraged beast. The Mustang rocketed away from the line. The Camaro started and then sputtered as its owner, overcome by nerves, missed a shift and stalled the car. Halfway down the street, the Mustang skidded to a stop. The driver got out and waved at the crowd. I thought he was flaunting his victory. He got back into his car and backed up all the way down the street, stopping near the Camaro. I was laughing my ass off because I thought he was giving the guy the finger or something. Then I heard the announcer say that the drivers had decided to have a do-over. I was aghast. That's not the way racing works. There aren't any do-overs. What a loser, I thought. This guy has read one too many comic books. The crowd loved him though. Even the people around us were patting Angela on her shoulders and telling her what a good guy her husband was. I did notice then that the stupid witch who only seconds ago had been sneaking feels of my tool had moved away from me. Screw her, I thought. Then I remembered that I already had. Angela was so busy nodding her head and talking about her husband to people in the crowd that she apparently didn't notice that hot little woman with the clipboard smiling at him too. I know women, and that woman wanted Angela's husband and badly. The entire crowd was watching as the two drivers reset their vehicles. Apparently, I was the only person there who was pissed. I was still running that shit over in my mind. I'd seen all kinds of racing, but I had never seen anyone do a goddamned do-over. The cheerleader waved the flag, and they took off. Hubby had a little too much wheel spin, and the Camaro lurched ahead. At the halfway mark, the Camaro was just a bit ahead. The entire crowd uttered an "oh" at the same time. I was probably alone in thinking, okay, dumbass, that's what you get? Then the pony car just surged ahead, and by the time they crossed the line, he was well ahead of the Camaro. Both drivers got out and shook hands. They raised their hands together, and that crowd went wild. I'd made arrangements to see old Banana Tits tomorrow, but for now it was clear that she'd rather be with him. Not that I minded. She'd be back giving me B-job again sooner rather than later. It also gave me a chance to find out who the hell that woman with the black hair was. Now let's hear the story from Angela's perspective. Seeing Jerry in the crowd was a surprise. At first, I decided that I should avoid him. After all, anyone could have seen us together and maybe remembered that they'd seen us together some other time as well. After a few moments though, lust won out over decorum and I had to just go over to him. I don't know why I let things with him get as far as they had. I love Lucas with all of my heart. Maybe it was just that I'd gotten so bored with this town. Of course, it could also have been the fact that I simply hate my job. I feel like such a fool there. I mean, I busted my ass in college for 4 years to get a degree that cost my parents and me over $100,000. And what kind of job did it get me? I make $1 per hour more than 4 high school graduates and 1 high school dropout. The saddest thing about it is that when you look at our checks, because of certain unspecified bonuses, the high school dropout makes the most. I spend all day checking over their figures and correcting their mistakes. I even get sent out to run errands and anything else that no one else wants to do. So in January, in the middle of the biggest snowstorm in history, when the manager decides to boost the morale of the staff, I'm the one who has to go out in the storm to bring back coffee and donuts for these 304s. And to add insult to injury, he never even asked if I wanted anything. It was insulting. Jerry coming to town recently was the only thing that kept me from quitting. After his company got here, made their movie and left, I was quitting the bank. For now though, Jerry made my job worth it. I did feel a little bit guilty about what I did with him, but it was so exciting and years from now it would never matter. I'd also made a solemn promise that when he left town I'd never cheat on Lucas again. Besides, Lucas got all of the sex that he could handle for me anyway. I had never once refused him, so it wasn't like he was losing anything. As he watched the cars getting set up for the races, I edged my way closer to him, and then when he wasn't expecting it, spoke to him. "My husband is probably going to win this," I said. That way if anyone around us was actually listening, they'd only hear me talking about Lucas. Jerry turned and hit me with that beautiful smile of his. He said something about the cars that I wasn't paying any attention to. Actually, my attention was on moving closer to him, and during the commotion caused by the cars, I grabbed a quick feel of his male anatomy. Actually, Lucas was bigger, in terms of endowment, but Jerry was just wilder in bed. He made me do things and enjoy them that my husband would never think of. Then they got to the last race, and I noticed that everyone was patting me on the back. Apparently, Lucas had done something great. I hadn't noticed. I moved away from Jerry, but he knew that we'd see each other tomorrow on my lunch hour. Lucas won the race much as I'd expected. I ran over to him with the rest of the crowd. He saw me and turned away from me. It actually hurt me. I'd never done anything to hurt him, so I wondered what the hell was wrong with him. I didn't find out until we got home that night. "Who was that guy you were smiling at during the race?" he asked me point blank. At first I was at a loss for words. I hadn't even realized that Lucas had seen me with Jerry. "That was Jerry," I said. "I know him from work." I really didn't like the look Lucas had on his face. "Are you jealous?" I asked, smiling. "You are, aren't you?" I started laughing so hard I almost couldn't stand up. "Honey, Jerry's company is going to make a movie of some kind here in town. He's setting up a line of credit with the bank. I'm the only person he knows in town, so he said hi to me while he was at the race. You're the only person around here that I'm married to." "Jerry wouldn't even look at me twice," I said. "He can hang around with all of those actress types. Why the hell would he be interested in an old, married housewife?" As I made dinner for the two of us, I noticed that the trophy Lucas had gotten from the race was on the back porch. In typical fashion, he'd won the thing but didn't really care what happened to it. For Lucas, the event itself was the thrill. He wasn't into trophies or any kind of accolades. After dinner, we watched TV for a while, and I tried to get Lucas to come up to bed with me. That was my normal pattern. I'd have sex with Lucas the night before I met Jerry. That way, my husband was the one getting his sex first. Jerry would be the one who got seconds, whether sloppy or not. Plus, that way if things got a little wild with Jerry, I could always simply tell Lucas that he had worn me out the night before. What was unusual was that for the first time since we'd known each other, Lucas told me that he wasn't in the mood. Since when did he have moods? I don't think he sensed anything concrete, but Lucas was fairly intuitive. I was sure that if I gave him any reason at all, he'd start snooping around, and this town simply wasn't big enough to hide anything. I decided right then and there that I'd have to call things off with Jerry. I'd miss him, but after all, he was only a fling. It would have run its course sooner or later anyway. But Lucas was the man I loved. I couldn't lose him for anything. It made me start thinking about what I'd been doing and how wrong it was. I knew I'd have to stop, but it was also wrong to give your word and then go back on it. I'd promised Jerry that I'd meet him tomorrow, and I knew what was going to happen. I decided that tomorrow would be the last time. And if Lucas got out of his funk and decided he wanted me tomorrow, then I'd be the one who wasn't in the mood. The next morning I woke up and got dressed. As usual on a day that I was going to see Jerry, I wore a skirt. Beside the fact that my legs were my best feature, it would give him quick and easy access. Since the skirt was a long one, I didn't even bother putting on panties. My fling with Jerry had actually never been about sex for me. The actual copulation was okay, but for me it had been more about the way he made me feel. He made me feel like I was a part of something other than this goddamn town. He made me feel like I had a secret that those stupid high school 304s I worked with didn't know anything about. He also made me feel wanted and lusted after. He made me feel like I was just as sexy as those young 304s, only better. I was better because the person other than my husband who lusted after me wasn't some 55-year-old bank manager with a bald head and a pot belly. I realized that morning that giving Jerry up might be harder than I'd thought. I kissed my sleeping husband goodbye, or tried to anyway. He seemed to roll over just before my lips touched him. I was sure that it was intentional, and that he was still pissed off at me about his suspicions. In a way, I thought it was cute. Lucas being jealous and acting like a love-sick schoolboy only served to under how devoted he was to me even after all of this time. On the other hand, if he didn't feel like kissing me, I knew someone who did, and Lucas acting stupid just left more kisses for him. I drove into town and parked in my usual spot behind the bank. I opened up the bank and went inside. Once inside, I locked the door behind me since we wouldn't open until 9 a.m. I started the coffee pot and checked over yesterday's figures again. Seeing the numbers again with fresh eyes would make sure that I hadn't missed anything. I poured myself a cup of coffee and thought again about my situation and how it had changed over the past few weeks. 3 weeks ago, closer to a month ago actually, the only thing I'd wanted was to quit this job. Now I looked forward to coming in on certain days of the week. A month ago, I've been trying to work up the courage to tell Lucas that I wanted to alter our plans. I still wanted the same end goals that we'd always shared. I just wanted to speed up the timetable. I was ready to quit working then and start making our babies. Was I really ready to be a mom, or was I just so goddamn tired of the bank that I'd seen that as the way out? I certainly didn't feel like mom material sitting here with my kitty, already wet thinking about what Jerry was going to do to it. Maybe what Jerry had just done was to show me that I really wasn't meant for this town. All of the places he talked about seemed so exciting. Maybe that was the life I was supposed to have. Lucas could set up his business and be successful at it anywhere. Why did we have to stay here? We really didn't. The only reason we were here was because we wanted to bring our kids up in a safe environment. There were pockets of safety in every city if you could afford them. Lucas made very good money, so we could afford to live wherever we wanted. In fact, that was another thing I needed to talk to him about. When we first moved here, Lucas and I had compromised on our finances and a few other things. We disagreed about a lot of things. I wanted a house in town. Lucas wanted the farm. I needed to pay off the rest of my student loans and the money my parents had given me. Lucas wanted to buy the farm and take out a small business loan. We couldn't agree on anything, and as much as I hated to admit it, Lucas had been right. I hadn't wanted to be saddled with any more debt. So Lucas had bought the farm and taken out his loan alone. Though I lived on the farm with him, it was in his name only. Lucas had also never incorporated or registered formally as a business. Basically, he was the business. He paid taxes on everything he did, and he had an accountant in town to help him with that. I'd offered to on several occasions, but I think that Lucas still resented the fact that I hadn't sided with him from the beginning. I wish to God that I had now, because if we'd split everything down the middle like most married couples, we'd have paid off my loans years ago. As it was, I struggled to make the minimum payment each month. I was brought out of my thoughts by the tapping on the door. I got up and opened the door for Ted Granger, our security guard. He smiled at me and told me good morning. "You look nice, Angela," he told me. It was the same thing every day. I never looked hot or pretty or sexy. I just looked nice. Goddamn it, Ted, I thought. An 8-year-old looks nice. A 400-pound, 65-year-old woman can look nice. You aren't lifting my spirits at all. Thanks, Ted, I replied. Ted went off to do his jobs, including opening the vault, which he'd need my help and my key to do. We'd do that just before we opened as usual. That way, anyone with a safe deposit box could get access to it during the day. By 9 o'clock, all of the tellers were at their windows and we'd opened the doors. The bank was a flurry of activity since most of the usual businesses made their weekend deposits on Monday morning before they opened. This weekend had been busier than usual since Friday had been the day we'd celebrated the 4th of July. It had seemed strange to me since normally all of those holidays were celebrated on a Monday. But this year the 4th had actually fallen on a Friday. I smiled at most of the customers and constantly looked around the bank to make sure that I wasn't needed for anything. I knew that I wouldn't be. Things were so boring in this town that watching grass grow was exciting. At 11:45, I crossed the bank and spoke to Marge Blair. She'd been working at the bank for so long it seemed like she'd always been there. She'd been the one who trained me. She looked up as I approached and smiled. "I already know," the old lady said sweetly. "You're going home to have lunch with your husband. I'll see you when you get back. Maybe you should have that cute husband of yours come here for lunch every once in a while," interjected Mary Clark. She smiled at me too. Only her smile and words got a different reaction from me. I got pissed. Mary was one of the tellers who were the manager. She was a step above being the town 304. She was only 22, with long blonde hair and big fake jugs. I was not happy about her taking an interest in Lucas. "Ooh, that would be nice," chimed in another teller. That just screwed up my morning. All of these stupid women that I couldn't stand, talking about how cute my husband was. I figured that the sudden interest was probably stemming from yesterday's race. I just smiled and nodded and left. I got into my car and drove away from the bank, but I didn't drive home. I drove to the Stafford Motel on the other side of town. When I got to the motel, I was already excited, but I had a weird feeling as well. Maybe it was those stupid witches back at the bank making me feel guilty. I tried to banish those thoughts from my head by reminding myself that Lucas had been the one who turned me down last night. I therefore had a right to go out and find what I needed somewhere else. In the back of my mind, I wondered how I'd feel if he did that, and suddenly I was pissed off all over again. Did what I was doing give him the right to do it too? The door opened and Jerry grabbed my hand and dragged me inside. As forceful as he was being, I could tell that he was excited too. As soon as I got into the room, he started kissing me. "So how are things going at work today?" he asked. That was another great thing about Jerry. He always asked me about the bank in my day. He didn't ask me about Lucas or his stupid car. He didn't ask about the race. He was interested in me. He asked me all about the bank and the armored car as he rubbed my jugs. I was on fire, but it just felt weird for some reason. I pulled Jerry's pants down, but he wasn't excited. That was strange too. Lucas was always ready for me. I had to play with Jerry and gave him B-job to get him excited. That had always seemed strange to me, but I chalked it up to differences among men. As I started blowing on Jerry's tool, I just felt strange. It wasn't anything physical. It was just that nagging feeling you get, like when you forget something. After a few moments, Jerry pulled me onto the bed. As usual, Jerry just humped away at me quickly. I hadn't even bothered to take my clothes off. I just pulled my skirt up and we went at it. As soon as he was done, he was back on his feet and looking at his watch. That was just like Jerry. He was always thinking about my schedule and what time I had to be back at work. "SHHHH," he said, as he crossed the room to go to the door. Jerry had a habit of looking out through the door to make sure no one saw me coming from his room. I'd seen him do it lots of times, but it was still funny to me. He acted like we were in some kind of spy movie or something. All of the previous times, though, hadn't prepared me for this one. As soon as the door opened, I heard a sound like something smacking into something else. Jerry flew backwards into the room. I was still lying there on his bed trying to use a napkin to clean myself off. I looked up in shock and saw my husband standing over Jerry, who was cowering on the floor. Lucas kicked Jerry so hard that Jerry's entire body moved, and then he looked at me and shook his head. Lucas didn't say a word. He just turned and spat on Jerry and then left. I jumped up and ran out of the room screaming for Lucas to come back, but he kept walking. People on the street were looking at us, so I turned around and went back to Jerry's room. Jerry was still on the floor groaning in pain. His nose was swollen and twisted to the side. It looked like it was broken. "Jerry, are you all right?" I asked. He just looked at me like I was stupid. "Do I look all right to you?" he asked. "Just get out of here, Angela. I'll call one of my friends and go to a clinic in the next town. You should just go and take care of your problems." "Jerry, I guess we probably won't be seeing each other anymore," I said. "You think?" he smirked. Then he shook his head and picked up his cell phone. I left the room and went out to my car. I got in and started the car but didn't drive off. I called Lucas on his cell phone and he didn't pick up. I called the house and left him a message telling him how sorry I was and that I was going to give him some time to calm down before we talked. I told him that I was sorry again and that I loved him. Then I tried to compose myself and drove back to work. The rest of the afternoon was uneventful except for a few jokes about me smelling like I hadn't had time to shower after my lunch. At 3:30, I got a call from a lawyer in one of the nearby towns. He told me that he was representing Lucas in our divorce, and he wanted to talk to me for a few moments. I took his number down and went into my office and called him right back. "Mr. Mason," I said, when he picked the phone up, "there has to be some kind of mistake. My husband and I aren't getting a divorce. We had a little incident today, but it's nowhere near serious enough for that. As soon as we talk, I'm sure he'll tell you the same thing." He was very polite over the phone. "I believe you, Mrs. Blue," he said. "You don't have to convince me. In fact, I'm hoping that everything works out just as you've said it will. But in the meantime, I've been asked to give you some instructions from your husband. Do you have a pen or something to write with?" "Yes, I do," I said. "Very good," he said. "According to your husband, you are to retain an attorney ASAP. He suggests that you pick one from one of the surrounding towns and not your own to avoid embarrassing either of you. He is also giving you 3 days to move out of the farmhouse. During that time, he'll live in the barn that he converted to house his business. He went into town and bought a small refrigerator and a microwave for the barn, so he won't be coming into the house while you're there except to shower or use the bathroom." "But where will he sleep?" I asked. "I'm sorry, but I don't know the answer to that question, ma'am," he said. "I can only tell you what I've been instructed to say. I want to talk to Lucas before this goes too far, I said. I will certainly relay that message, ma'am, he said. As soon as you have retained an attorney, please give him my contact information so we can get the process started. I have a meeting scheduled with your husband later today, so we can go over his proposed property division. Is there something that you'd like him to consider while we draw up the papers? Yeah, I said. I'd like him to consider that I love him and I made a mistake. I'm very sorry for what I did and I don't want a divorce. I'll tell him that, he said. Would you like to have the papers served at home? Your husband thought that doing that would save you the embarrassment of being served in a public place. Mr. Mason, can I ask you a question? I said. Of course, ma'am, he said. And please, call me Perry. In a case like mine, I'd imagine that the husbands are often in shock for a while. They're running on raw emotion, and they make decisions that they haven't thought out. In a lot of cases, it's really the pain that's making them do the things they do. Is that a fair assessment? I asked. In most cases, yes, he said. What about my case? I asked. Mrs. Blue, your husband walked calmly into my office. He'd taken down notes on what he wanted and had assessed the situation very calmly. He had also brought in some of your financial papers pertaining to his home and business so we could discuss the division of the assets. I don't think your husband is acting without thinking. I think that he's simply put his pain aside for the moment and thought about what he wants very calmly and with a cool head. As I hung up the phone, the tears started to fall. I worked for the rest of the day, and as usual, I was the last person to leave the bank. I dreaded going home for the first time I can remember. I pulled into our driveway and saw that the lights were still on in the barn. There were no lights on in the house, though. I did notice that the lock on the door had been changed, but it had been left open for me. I put my briefcase down on the floor and turned on the lights in the house. I looked around the kitchen and noticed that it was clean. Normally, even if he was working late, Lucas would have made us something for dinner. Shit. Normally, Lucas would have been in the house to welcome me home by wrapping those big old arms around me and trying to hug the life out of me. It's funny how you never remember or appreciate anything until it's gone. I looked in the fridge and grabbed 2 cold beers. On a night like this, Lucas would probably welcome a frosty Dos Equis enough that maybe he'd talk to me. As I headed for the barn, I noticed that I didn't hear the sounds of the machines humming and clanking as they made whatever parts he was working on. That was a good thing because it meant he'd have time to talk. I reached for the door handle and found that it was locked. I knocked on the door and waited for him to answer it. While I waited, I heard the sound of water coming from the other side of the barn. I shook my head because some things just don't ever change. I walked around the barn and found, as I'd expected to, Lucas washing his car. It was almost fitting that since he didn't expect to be spending any time with me, he'd use his time on the other thing that he loved. He didn't even look up as I approached him. I reached for his headphones, smiling like I always did. Before my hand touched them, he dropped the cloth he was polishing the car with and intercepted my hand all in one smooth motion. Don't touch me, he snapped. If I thought that I'd been shocked when he knocked Jerry back into the room, that was nothing compared to this. As I looked into the eyes of the man I'd loved for so long, I expected to see anger. I thought that this early in the situation, maybe there'd be hatred or resentment. I wouldn't have been shocked to see pain, frustration, confusion, or even tears. But I saw none of that. All I saw was resignation. I saw the very same thing I saw every time Lucas had to do something he didn't like or want to do, but had to because it was necessary. When I asked him to take out the garbage, I got that look. As soon as he'd taken care of whatever unpleasant duty or task he had, his smile came back. Right now, I was the unpleasant thing that had to be taken care of. Things were far worse than I'd ever imagined. Did Mr. Mason give you my messages? I asked. He just nodded as he went back to polishing his car. Lucas, I'm really yes. I began before he interrupted me. Again, there was no anger or pain in his voice at all. Just because I got the message doesn't mean I agreed to it, he said. I have no reason to talk to you. You have a very big reason to talk to me, Lucas, I said louder than I intended. I'm your wife. I love you. You love me. We have a problem that we really need to talk about. There has never been a time since we met that you and I couldn't sit down and work out our differences. We need to talk about this, Lucas. No matter how angry you are, we still have to talk. When did we ever get to the point where we couldn't talk? He dropped the rag and stood up to face me. Again, I expected anger, but it wasn't there. How about yesterday after the race when I asked you who that a-hole was, and instead of us talking, you lied to me, he said. Or how about today, when I caught you screwing the same a-hole in that sleazy motel? I had to do something, so I tried to lie about it. Lucas, I shouldn't have been in that room with him, but we weren't screwing, I said. Lucas just smiled at me. That's why we can't talk, he said. He pulled out his iPhone and pushed a couple of controls on it. Then he stuck the phone in my face, and I saw that he'd actually had time to record video of me and Jerry. There's no point in talking when you'll only lie, he said. You only have 2 days left to get all of your stuff out of my house. Don't waste it. This is my house too, Lucas, I said. I've lived here since the day we moved in. He just smiled at me again. Remember how upset you were about the cost of the house and the loan? He asked. You made me sign a paper that removed you from responsibility for any part of the debt I picked up buying the house. That also removes you from any degree of ownership. Lucas, where will I go? I asked him. I don't care, he said, as long as it's away from me. And please get yourself a lawyer. You'll get your papers tomorrow. I'd like to wrap this up as quickly as possible. Then why can't we talk? I asked. Lucas, I don't want a divorce. You should have thought about that while you were screwing other guys in motels, he said. You knew that I'd never put up with that, so it obviously means that you wanted a divorce. Lucas, I've been unhappy for a long time, I said, with tears beginning to form. Well, now you're free to go out there and make yourself as happy as you can, he said calmly, while rubbing what he thought was a smudge on his paint. Lucas, I wasn't unhappy with us, I said. I was just bored and I hate my job. You weren't cheating on the bank in that motel, he said. You were cheating on me. If you wanted to cheat on the bank, you could have stayed home and spent time with your husband. Or you could have called in on days that you weren't really sick. Or you could have just quit. We have more than enough money. Lucas, after all of the time we've been together, can't you give us a chance? I asked. Yes, I can, he said. But it's the same chance you gave me. When you discovered that you weren't happy and you started screwing strangers, that means it's no chance at all. I really have to finish this, so any further talks will have to happen in the lawyer's office. You'll be waiting for a long time then, I snapped. I'll fight this with everything I have. As I walked away, Lucas didn't even bother to look up or to reply. He simply kept polishing his car. Meanwhile, Jerry. I woke up and looked around. The room I was in wasn't my motel room. Then the throbbing in both my face and my side reminded me of where I was. I sat up, painfully. The aching in my side threatened to knock me out again. I swallowed a couple of pain pills. Here, dumbass, said Arnie's gruff voice. You really screwed this one up. We can still go through with it, I said. There was no police report filed in either town. No one knows that we exist. Although with all of the trouble brewing in Old Banana Tit's home life, maybe we should move the timetable up. Like up to when? He asked. Like tomorrow, I said. Today, all of the little businesses in town will make their midweek deposits. It's also the time when all of the payroll cash will be in the bank for all of the people who work for the bigger businesses around the area. That little bank will be full of money, and that way we can get the hell out of here before I get named in a divorce action. Arnie laughed. Hey, maybe you ought to bring the little woman with us. Get real, I said. That which means nothing to me. I had to take Viagra around her and still couldn't get it up sometimes. I'd rather screw her husband's car. Don't even think about it, said Arnie. The last thing we need while we're trying to blend into the woodwork is a bright green car that's so loud you can hear it in the next town. Let's hear the story from Lucas's perspective. Angela was supposed to have moved out yesterday. For days had passed since I'd given her 3 days to leave. I'd called my lawyer early this morning, and he'd told me to calm down. He said that the verbal notice I'd given really couldn't be enforced. He'd draft a legal notice and give it to her today. He also hadn't received any communication concerning the divorce papers he'd delivered to her. He told me that sometimes people tried to simply bury their heads in the sand, hoping that the situation would rectify itself or go away. Angela constantly called me and left messages for me. She was trying to come up with every possible solution she could. The only one I'd even responded to was when she suggested that I go out and screw someone else for a month, so we be even. The only reason I responded to that was because hearing that she'd been screwing that guy for a whole month hurt me even more. But I kept my cool and simply told her that if she thought that it could be fixed that easily, then she had never loved me the way I loved her, and I really did need to move on with my life. She called back almost immediately. "Who is she?" she screamed. "The only reason that you just give up on us so quickly after all of this time would be if you've already got someone else, or maybe you've got someone else in mind." "There isn't anyone else, Angela," I told her calmly. "Then why won't you give us one more chance?" she asked. "It'll never happen again. I swear it." Then her voice got very quiet and very low. "I miss you, Lucas. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I just needed something." "What you mean is that you never meant to get caught," I said. "And now you're free to go and find whatever you need. If you did love me, you never would have cheated me this way. And you're absolutely goddamned right, it'll never happen again because you'll never have the chance." That conversation had happened the day before and was still stinging me. I loaded another pallet of blanks into the machine. The program was written so that it would mill 4 parts on one pallet. I was just about to push the cycle start button to begin running the parts when I heard the tapping on the door. I honestly thought that it was Angela. Then I realized that I'd seen her drive off to work that morning, so there was no way she'd be back at only 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe she was sick, or maybe she was coming to tell me that she was leaving. That would be great news, except for the fact that she told me less than 24 hours ago that I'd have to get the army to make her leave. I unlatched the door and pulled it open. Standing there in front of me was the cop from the race. Again, I was struck by how gorgeous she was. This time she actually had on official sheriff's department clothing. Her pale eyes were hidden behind a pair of aviator sunglasses, but nothing could hide those jugs. "Mr. Blue, I'm going to need you to come with me," she said. Her voice was emotionless and official. Her eyes raked over the inside of the barn in that way that cops have of checking out everything, even when you haven't done anything. "Officer, I began. "Gorgeous," she said, and then her face got flushed and I could tell she was embarrassed. That's what you said about me the other day." "That was almost a week ago," I said. "I apologized for it then, and it was before I realized that you were a public official." "So does that mean that you didn't mean it?" she asked. "Or just that you wished you hadn't said it about a cop? Which one will make it so I don't have to go with you?" I asked. "Is the town really so hard up for cash that you're arresting me because I accidentally gave you a compliment?" "You're not under arrest," she said. "There's been an incident in town. I need you to remain calm, okay?" I nodded. "The bank was robbed a short time ago. The security guard, Ted Granger, was killed and your wife was shot. She's in surgery right now. They think she's going to pull through, but we need you to come to the hospital." "No," I said. She'd already turned towards her car, expecting me to follow her. I paused, admiring the way her bum made even those formless police uniform pants look incredible. She turned and caught me looking. "Excuse me?" she said. "Your wife is in the hospital." She looked at me like I was some kind of a bug. "Maybe I will arrest you," she said. For the first time since this thing happened, I couldn't put up my front anymore. At what was the worst possible time, I just let my emotions go. "I don't have a wife anymore," I snapped, angrily. "So whoever you have in the hospital is on her own. If you want to arrest me, just go ahead. I already have a lawyer, the same one who's handling the divorce." I saw her hand hovering near her holster. She looked into my eyes and hers softened. She pushed me back inside my barn, looking around again as she came in. She made me sit down on the couch I had in the corner. "You still had a wife Sunday at the race," she said. "Remember how you threw that in my face?" I nodded. "So what happened?" "I found out Monday that she'd been screwing some guy in a motel for about a month," I said. "I filed for divorce the same day. Maybe you two will work things out," she said. "Excuse me, officer," I said, "but there's not a chance of that." "You're a lot smarter than I am then," she said. "My ex cheated on me for over 5 years. I didn't get the strength to walk away until the 3rd or 4th time that I caught him." My eyebrows went up in surprise, and she looked at me. "What?" she said. "I'm sorry," I said. "I just can't imagine anyone cheating on you. He must have been stupid, you're so." She looked at me funny then. "Oh no," I said. "I'm not making that mistake again." "I know you don't want to do this," she said, "and legally I can't make you. I'd have to go back to the sheriff's station and get a warrant as a material witness sworn out or something. But I'd really appreciate it if you'd come with me. I locked the barn and went with her. We drove in near silence to the hospital that was only 8 miles away from my house. "Who knows?" she said as we got out of the car. "Maybe this will get the two of you back together." "No chance of that," I said. She took me over to the nurse's station. I already knew both of the nurses there. She gave me one of her business cards. "I'll be back when the doctors call us to tell us that she's out of surgery," she said.